All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kyle Lanslone Show. I know I had said that Scott Horton would be joining me today, but we couldn't make that line up. I will be rolling solo on today's show, and I have a lot I want to cover, a lot going on. Of course, I want to start off and talk about Russiagate, such an important event in our recent history. And now that it's back in the news, I do think we have to touch on it. I want to talk about Trump and his latest comments when it comes to the war in Ukraine, and also him demanding a thank you from the Palestinians. Absolutely just sick stuff. All right, so let's jump into it and play this first clip of Donald Trump discussing Barack Obama's role in Russiagate.
It wasn't lots of people all over the place. It was them too. But the leader of the gang was President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? And except for the fact that he gets shielded by the press for his entire life, that's the one they look. He's guilty. It's not a question. You know, I like to say, let's give it time. It's there. He's guilty. This was treason. This was every word you can think of. They tried to steal the election. They tried to obfuscate the election. They did things that nobody's ever even imagined, even in other countries. You've seen some pretty rough countries. This man has seen some pretty rough countries, but you've never seen anything like that. And we have all of the documents. And from what Tulsi told me, she's got thousands of additional documents coming. So President Obama, it was his concept, his idea, but he also got it from crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill.
So I really want to take this and break it down what Donald Trump is saying here, because there's a lot of important truth here and then parts where Trump may go too far. And so Trump very importantly explains that this is a multi-pronged operation, Russiagate. It was about trying to, as he says, obfuscate the election, but, trying to throw the election towards Hillary Clinton. They were trying to make it sound as though Donald Trump was working with the Russians. They did this through the DNCCC hats and some other things to make it appear as though Donald Trump was the favorite candidate of Vladimir Putin working with the Russians. And of course, that was supposed to sway the election in Hillary Clinton's favor. It didn't work out. And so after the election, they were using this against Donald Trump's presidency. As Scott Horton explains very well, the first goal here was actually to take away the election victory from Donald Trump, to get the intelligence community to brief the Electoral College, convince enough electors that maybe even if they don't go towards Hillary Clinton, they were talking about Colin Powell or, another establishment Republican figure. I think Paul Ryan was another name that was thrown out there. They wanted to take the election victory away from Donald Trump and the American people that voted for him, right? And when that didn't work, then they went to the public and then they set the stage to undermine Trump's presidency. And with incredible effectiveness, I have to add, Donald Trump campaigned on getting along better with Putin, establishing new deals with the Russians, avoiding new wars was Donald Trump's goal. And of course, he got pulled in so deeply to the war in Ukraine. Well, I guess, then was just the Ukrainian civil war, but he ends up sanctioning Russia. He ends up kicking Russian diplomats out of the United States. He ends up sending lethal arms to Ukraine for the first time. These are major, major provocations that Donald Trump engaged in, and likely in part because he felt politically constrained by the Russiagate scandal. Now, if Donald Trump was a more intelligent man, I think this would have not only been very easy for him to defeat, but when he sat down and explained to the American people what happened here, it would have given him an even larger mandate and desire that the American people could get along with Russia, that this is what we want. But unfortunately, Trump has never really been able to do that. This is one of the best statements I think we have in over the 10 years of Russiagating, of Donald Trump explaining actually what happened to him and what the Obama administration, the Clinton campaign, the U.S. intelligence community did to Donald Trump in the 2015 election, 2016 election, and then particularly in the first year of his candidacy. Now, when he's talking about Barack Obama and treason, I think in a lot of ways he makes, maybe not, Trump isn't making a good argument, but I do think if you look at the claim and you want to assign Barack Obama with treason here, I do think it's warranted. Now, maybe this whole operation was organized by Barack Obama's ogre, John Brennan, the then CIA director. He really seems to be the figure in the administration behind this and who it had carried it out and was the driving force behind the intelligence. But the recent revelations from Tulsi Gabbard does make it clear that Obama gave his hand in this and engaged in this. And look, Donald Trump sees himself as the victim here. And I don't like that. I don't like Donald Trump all that much. That his presidency, that he was personally victimized here is the least of my concern. What really makes, I think, this an act of treason, what really makes this a horrific event is what it did to the American people and the American political discourse. I argue, and I think I'm correct, that had Hillary Clinton accepted that she lost the 2016 election and allowed the Russiagate narrative to die, there would not be a war in Ukraine today. The Biden administration, because of the hysteria generated from Russia and the political kind of corner he painted himself into, with Vladimir Putin being the new Hitler and things like that. Again, the well was poisoned so much by Russiagate on Russia discourse that when the Russians came to Joe Biden and presented a perfectly reasonable agreement to avoid the war in Ukraine, the Biden administration refused to even consider it. That is a massive, massive crime against the American people that we now know Obama had a direct hand in carrying out. And so, I really did want to just highlight and go over that. Now, I do want to emphasize that I don't think it's a good thing for uh, when one party comes into power in a country to go after crimes against the previous administration. Now, there may be some case for that, like the CIA torture program, but in this case of politics, I do think it's best not to pursue treason. And Donald Trump can't because of the Supreme Court ruling stemming from the January 6th and all that stuff, where Donald Trump was, accused of crimes and argued that, a president can't be convicted of crimes if it was an act of official duty. And I think Obama would claim this was an act of official duty. So we're not really talking about treason here. We're not talking about Obama going to jail here. But rhetorically, I do think we should refer to this as an act of treason. Now, one other thing I wanted to point out here about Russiagate, and thank you to producer Chris for pulling this clip together, it is that there were a lot of Republicans, and all the bad Republicans were signed on to this in the beginning. So let's look at what Lindsey Graham had to say about this in 2017.
The Russians did it. It was the Russians who tried to interfere in our election. Every member of the committee agrees it was the Russians. They didn't change the outcome, but they did release information embarrassing to the Democratic Party. It did affect Hillary Clinton. There's only one person in Washington that I know of that has any doubt about what Russia did in our election, and it's President Trump.
And so,
Senator, are you now saying that you don't believe that Russia tried to interfere in the 2016 election?
Well, what I am saying is that you left a lot out here. It's called the Horowitz Report. It's the Mueller investigation was crooked and rotten to the core. The Washington Post and the New York Times got a Pulitzer Prize for reporting on Trump's campaign's relationship with Russia. It was all BS. At the time, I didn't know any of that. At the time, I didn't know that they were manufacturing evidence to get FISA warrants. There was a confirmation bias. Durham didn't say there was no political bias. He said quite the opposite. He said every time a FISA warrant was sought in the Mueller world, they got it, and the errors made to get warrants in this space were a lot greater than they were in anything not involving Trump. But what I'm saying is that this is new evidence. This is something I didn't know, you didn't know, that in 2016, Obama suggested, I don't like the outcome that there's no evidence Russia was involved. Well, now we all say Russia was involved, but in 2016, they said Russia wasn't involved. What the hell happened? Let's get a special counsel.
So this is, I mean, in a lot of ways, absolutely hilarious, right? We can see just what a liar and a scumbag that Lindsey Graham is. But I also think it reflects a important attribute about Trump, too, in his presidency. When Lindsey Graham was initially saying this is when Donald Trump was trying to meet with Vladimir Putin. They had the Helsinki summit, right, where Donald Trump was saying he wanted to improve the relationship with Russia. It's only now that Donald Trump is going along with the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine that Lindsey Graham is saying that Russiagate was fake, right? It's because Russiagate worked. And Lindsey Graham knew this all along. A lot of the opposition research came from that was from the Steele dossier, was passed through John McCain's hands. And of course, John McCain and Lindsey Graham were very good friends. And so Lindsey Graham was, I'm sure, very aware from day one. He is a stupid man. And so maybe that could be a potential excuse for why he would say that he was unaware of this. But it was very obvious. I was able to figure it out right away, as were a lot of other people. And of course, over time, the great journalism of Aramate, Matt Taibbi, Michael Tracy, and others really exposed how much of a hoax and a ploy all this was to the American people. But Lindsey Graham's changing position there, I think, is a reflection, of course, of him trying to cozy up to Donald Trump. But remember, Trump was president in 2017 when he was saying that the first time. And I think a lot of that has to do with Lindsey Graham changing his tune because Donald Trump has changed his position on Russia. In fact, Donald Trump's position on Russia is getting ever more hawkish. We actually had this clip from him today, speaking in Scotland next to the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer about his policy and position towards Russia.
In all sense, your frustration with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Do you think he's been lying to you about his intentions in Ukraine?
Well, I don't want to use the word lying. All I know is we'd have a good talk, and it seemed on, let's say, 3 occasions, it seemed that we were going to have a ceasefire and maybe peace, and you divide it up and you do whatever you have to do, that obviously to get to the end. And all of a sudden, missiles are flying into Kiev and other places. And I say, what's that all about? I spoke to him 3-4 hours ago, and it looked like we were on our way. And then I'd say, forget it, and I'm not going to talk anymore. This has happened on too many occasions, and I don't like it. I don't like it.
So, Mr. President, have you had any other training channels conversations with the Russians reiterating this?
In what?
Reiterating this new pressure and deadline.
We're going to have you're the press. I'm reiterating it to you. I'd say 10 to 12 days. I'll announce it probably tonight or tomorrow. But there's no reason to wait. If you know what the answer is going to be, why wait? And it would be sanctions and maybe tariffs, secondary tariffs. You know what a secondary tariff is. And look, the Russian economy, I don't want to do that to Russia. I love the Russian people. They're great people. I don't want to do that to Russia. But this thing, they're losing a lot of Russians. They've lost 1 million Russians. And that's the, sons. That's the sons and daughters of Russian families. They leave the house. They go, bye, mom, bye, dad, and then they get blown away. And Ukrainian, too. Look at Ukraine. It's a disaster what's happened there. But it continues to go on. As you know, we made a deal where the European Union is essentially involved, but it's NATO, and we're supplying weapons to NATO. NATO's now paying.
So this is an absolutely baffling, rambling statement by Donald Trump that shows he really still just doesn't comprehend geopolitics. This man thinks he could get on the phone with Vladimir Putin, have a 1-hour call, and that Putin is going to call off the war, that it's going to be over. look, tactically, the Russians are in a position where they're on in the offensive. The Ukrainians are in vulnerable defensive positions. Their defensive lines are barely stitched together. Russia right now is outproducing the collective West in military capabilities. They have additional military assistance coming from North Korea and Iran. And so, from the Russian perspective, strategically on the battlefield, they have a clear upper hand. They are the Ukrainians are on their back foot. They're struggling. They don't have trained troops. They don't have the manpower. Importantly, they don't have the interceptors and the artillery shells needed to fight off the Russian advance. And so, from Vladimir Putin's position, agreeing to a ceasefire before the Ukrainians have started to shift their positions and, get closer is a giveaway to the Ukrainian side, who would use a ceasefire period to train new soldiers, to get new soldiers on the battlefield, to get more equipment to their frontline soldiers, to further dig in their defensive positions, to establish new defensive positions. It would be a strategic loss for Russia to do this. And I think that, I've heard this statement from the Trump administration several times now, that Trump conducts geopolicy through the force of his personality. That Donald Trump really believes that if he calls and has a good conversation with Vladimir Putin, that Putin is just going to go along with whatever he wants. This is complete insanity. It doesn't understand the realistic situation on the ground in Ukraine. And importantly, it doesn't factor in the recent history in Ukraine. From the Russian perspective, I'm sure at this point in time is absolutely intolerable to agree to a ceasefire that doesn't recognize Russia's core demands in Ukraine. This is because in 2014, 2015, after the Ukrainian civil war broke out, we had the Russians intervene on the side of the separatists in the Donbass region and agreeing to the Minsk agreements, where there was supposed to be a recognition eventually of autonomy for the Donbass and for the end of the Ukrainian civil war. But the Ukrainians never allowed the war to end. And whether or not this was the plan from the start, Western officials who helped negotiate that agreement, including the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, have said that that agreement was a ploy. It was a stunt, because they knew at the time that if the Russians came in, they could take the Donbass, they could annex the Donbass. The Ukrainian military was weak. There was nothing they could do about it. But they used that period where it was supposed to be a peace deal to prepare for war, to train up the Ukrainian soldiers, to get them trained on NATO weaponry and tactics, to transfer more and more arms into Ukraine. And that's why the Ukrainian military was able to stand so tall when Russia invaded in 2022. And so, again, if you're Russia, if you're Vladimir Putin, you're not going to get tricked on the same gambit twice. You're not going to allow them to deceive you in the exact same way for a second time. And so there's not going to be a unilateral, unconditional ceasefire take place in Ukraine until there's a time where there's essentially a draft agreement being negotiated that meets a lot of the Russian core demands. Of course, the Russian core demands right now are recognition of Crimea, the Donbass republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia as Russian territory, all this territory annexed by Russia. This is going to be a major concession from the Ukrainian side. Russia doesn't control all this territory. I do think the Kremlin is asking for a lot here. But again, we have to understand this conflict. Russia is waging a war of attrition. They're trying to break the Ukrainian military. And so that Russia is asking for more than they currently control is because Russia understands with enough time, with enough pressure, they could take that territory. And so they could either take it by force or they could take it at the negotiating table. But they're not going to give that up. They're also Ukraine not joining NATO, which seems to be a more solidified opinion at this point. So I think the big one is going to be the territory, probably the unfreezing of Western Russian assets in Western bases. That's like $200 to $300 billion. The removal of sanctions on Russia. All these things, of course, could happen very quickly. The war could end very quickly. However, Donald Trump is continuing to enable Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine, right? This is what he needed to do to end the war, is to go to Zelensky and say, look, you have like 3 months worth of weapons. You could continue to fight for 3 months, right? We're not going to pull the plug. We're not going to cause the collapse of your military tomorrow. However, you have to understand at the end of this period, there is no more U.S. weapons. So go negotiate, get the best deal you can, because if you continue to fight, you're going to get cut off. The Ukrainian military is going to collapse, and then Vladimir Putin is going to force you to sign on the dotted line whatever Russia wants at the barrel of a gun. And Russia has, by the way, floated that, look, if the Ukrainian military collapses, if we take the 4 republics that we already have, or that we've already annexed by force, then we're going to demand even more territory. And I think it's looking increasingly likely that Ukraine, if they continue to fight, are really putting themselves in a position where they're going to lose all their access to the Black Sea. And so Trump's idea that he's, going to just call and end this war right away and it's going to end the conflict is completely absurd. And now that he's like mad and cranky that he's not going to talk to Vladimir Putin anymore is really disappointing. It's also worth noting, and this is something I have in an article that I wrote at judgenap.com today, that the Kremlin has been saying over the past couple of weeks that Putin is open to meeting with Donald Trump in China later this year. And so that would be a real opportunity maybe for Trump to understand the Russian position a little better, and with some rapid diplomacy, actually maybe a chance to sign or move really close to a deal to end the war in Ukraine. But it seems that Donald Trump really isn't going to take that opportunity. Now he goes on to threaten more sanctions on Russia, secondary tariffs. This is going to, I believe, do more damage to the United States and the West than it does to Russia. At this point in time, the U.S. has really, really fueled the alternative global world order, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, these alternative economic forums that now exist where countries are increasingly doing business and bilateral trade or things like that, rather than actually doing business through the dollar, through the SWIFT system that has been established. If the United States starts to put these secondary tariffs 100%, 500% on Turkey, Brazil, China, India, I think this is going to have a major impact on the conflict. Now, I want to move on from this and talk about Gaza before we wrap up here. This next clip is Donald Trump talking about his Gaza policy.
Prime Minister says that recognising the Palestinian state would be a concrete step towards a lasting peace. Do you agree with his position?
Well, I'm not going to take a position. I don't mind him taking a position. I'm looking for getting people fed right now. To me, that's the number one position, because you have a lot of starving people. You have people that, the United States recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we gave $60 million. It's a lot of money. No other nation gave money. I know the Prime Minister would if he knew about it, and he really knows about it now because we're going to be discussing it. But we gave $60 million. Nobody said even thank you. Thanks. Somebody should say thank you. But other nations are going to have to step up. When I spoke to Ursula yesterday, she said that the European nations are going to step up very substantially. I told Israel, I told Bibi that you're going to have to now maybe do it a different way.
Do you think a ceasefire is even possible, Mr. President?
Yeah, a ceasefire is possible, but you have to get it. You have to end it. You're talking about with Israel's. You're talking about there, because we have many ceasefires going on. The whole world is. If I weren't around, you'd have right now 6 major wars going on. India would be fighting with Pakistan. You see what we just did yesterday with 2 nations that we're trading with. And during the trade, I said, I'm not going to do any trade deal unless you guys settle your differences. And we got it settled in 24 hours. I mean, they just announced it was settled.
So we all owe a thank you to producer Chris for editing the bagpipes out of that clip and making it far easier to listen to. But on the actual subject of Trump demanding a thank you from the Palestinians, this is just sick and depraved in the most awful thing that I could think of an American president saying in some time. What he's talking about is the U.S. gave $60 million to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This is a it claims to be an aid agency. It's a tool of Israel's genocide in Gaza. They set up 4 aid sites far away from where the people are. So every single day, the Palestinians have to walk past IDF positions where they're getting gunned down by tanks, drones, artillery fire, to go to these aid sites that frequently aren't open, that don't have enough food, that force the Palestinians to fight to get the food. And then the contractors at the GHF sites open fire on the Palestinians. They gas the Palestinians and force the Palestinians to walk back through the same killing fields manned by Israeli soldiers to bring a meager amount of food back to their starving families. That the Palestinians would thank the United States for this is sick. It's disgusting. And you can't imagine a president who's so stupid, who understands so little about what's going on in the world, that he doesn't understand that he's asking for a thank you from a population that he's actively committing a genocide against. This is just absolutely horrific. Now, there is a piece of this that I want to highlight too. Donald Trump says in here that the U.S. gave $60 million. Now, previously, the State Department had announced $30 million that they had given to the GHF. And so Trump is, I think, saying that he's going to double that. And so that is very concerning, because this is an organization that does not need to be operating in Gaza. This organization is a part of the genocide. This organization opened 2 months ago. Already 1,100 Palestinians have been killed trying to reach their gates or inside their distribution sites. This is absolutely awful. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today, everyone. Oh, wait. So one more thing. Yep.
I think
So
Israel's come to conclude that they can't achieve a goal of ending the war with Hamas that would be satisfactory to the safety of Israel. And if they're going to do in Gaza what we did in Tokyo and Berlin, take the place by force, then start over again, presenting a better future for the Palestinians, hopefully having the Arabs take over the West Bank and Gaza. But I think going forward, Christian, you're going to see a change in tactics, a full military effort by Israel to take Gaza down like we did in Tokyo and Berlin.
I mean, what a monster. He almost trying to top Donald Trump and just signing off on this genocide. And when these are the members of your government, the people who represent you on the world stage, who so proudly boast about taking part in a genocide and so proudly send our hard-earned tax dollars, all of our weapons, use all the American leverage on the global stage, all the goodwill that America creates through our industry and all the good things we do in the world is being tainted and ruined by idiots like Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump signing off on this genocide. Well, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. Everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. I will, I'm sure, get Scott back on the show at some time in the near future. And of course, we will be back on Wednesday and Thursday at 4:45 Eastern. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube so you don't miss an episode.